Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm your host, So Not the Hero Type, and in this short we're going to talk about simulations and how to use them and what they're used for. Now in previous versions there was something called Crash, which was essentially a simulation mod that was used heavily in RO and RP1, but now RP1 actually has it built in. It's built into Kerbal Construction Time, and it's kind of streamlined the whole process. Now we have this little thing here that's enable part failures. I'm going to recommend you leave this turned off because when you do a simulation, you're not really worrying about the failure rate, you're worrying about if the rocket can work at its max capacity. That being said, always look at your rated burn times, which you can actually find in this menu right here when you right click on it. And another quick thing, there are these little extra telemetry and extra pre-flight. Extra pre-flight kind of helps lower the ignition chance, and telemetry lets you collect data a little bit faster. But in exchange, you're also adding more to your build time. So if you're using a fresh engine, like the first time you're using it, these might be nice to have if it's an important mission. But make sure if you duplicate this, you turn those off because you're going to be wasting a lot of days and just overall adding to the total build time. So keep in mind that's good to use for the first one, maybe two launches, but you don't need it anytime after that. Another quick thing about burn time is you need to understand that when you're in simulation, if you have part failures turned off, you can burn an engine indefinitely. It won't cut the engine off due to overburning it. So keep that in mind when you're doing your simulations and your builds. Always check everything on your rocket, make sure you're not exceeding the burn time too much if you're going to even get to the burn time in general. Also keep in mind every time you upgrade an engine, it will reset the data on the engine, so even though an upgraded engine will have a lower initial ignition failure chance, the more you use it, the better it will be. All that being said, let's go ahead and go over to the launch pad and actually go through a simulation real quick. So, for those of you with a keen eye, you may notice that this was the rocket that we built in the last episode but never launched. I went ahead and did these simulations while I filmed that, but I wanted to touch on these in a separate short. So this is a spin stability rocket, and in the end, we end up making some tweaks and stuff and making it as good as we want, but I'm going to show you the very first launch we do. We're going to make sure all our science is running, and I want you to pay attention to these contract windows over here. The nice thing about simulations is you can actually see what contracts you can complete, but they don't actually complete. You don't get anything for them. They'll stay in the little tab bar up above. So for example, if you want to see if a probe will be able to last in orbit long enough to complete a contract, you could always just start the probe by itself in orbit and time warp forward and see if it's going to be capable of actually achieving the mission contract goals. I also usually have my science turned on because I want to see roughly how much science I'll get per launch, just to give myself kind of a heads up. But now that everything's set up, we're gonna go ahead and launch the rocket. These particular engines take a second to spool up, which is why I have the staging split the way I do. You notice that I staged the rocket, it started to slowly gain a fire trail, and then I let the clamp go. Keep that in mind because a lot of the rockets do take a little bit of time to actually get going, just like in real life. You'll also notice that the rocket's going to start to spin a little bit. That's the spin stability that we were talking about in the last episode. And we have a little bit of a wobble, so we could actually add a little bit more of a spin to this, a little bit more of an angle to the wings, and it'll keep it a little more straight up, start to spin a little earlier, and hopefully prevent that wobble from happening. Now I'm going to use a little bit of post-production magic and speed up a little bit. I want you to watch some of these contracts over here in the corner because they're going to start going off all of a sudden. The ones I really want to focus on are the Kármán line and the altitude rocket because those are what we built this particular rocket for. Now, we also got a little bit downrange with this rocket, which means we didn't get the altitude that it could have reached because of the downrange, some of the delta V and the force kind of moved us downrange rather than straight up. So maybe with a little more spin stability, we can get this thing to shoot a little bit straighter and get ourselves a little bit more altitude. The things I'm talking about is what you want to use simulations for. You want to find out how you can improve your rocket. You want to make sure it can do what it can do. You don't want it going downrange if it's an altitude rocket, and you want it to go downrange and less high if it's, a downrange rocket. With that in mind, I want you to understand that it's better to overbuild a rocket. Don't just make it the bare minimum, because if you can reuse a rocket several times, you can save money on tooling. Saving money on tooling means you can put more into your KSC and advance a little bit quicker. Let's go ahead and change over to another launch where I've actually adjusted the spin stability and go from there. So I very slightly tilted the wings a little bit more. We're back on the launch pad, so let's go ahead and launch this rocket. Now I want you to pay attention to a few things. This rocket's going to start spinning a little bit earlier and a little bit more aggressively than the one before it. Another thing you may notice is we're going to stay on the nav ball where we started. We're going to pretty much stay in the center. We do get a little bit of a wobble, but it's not too bad. But the important part is we're not starting to pitch down range because our spin kicked in early enough to keep us on the straight trajectory we initially had the rocket at. Now I recommend you play around with this flight recorder menu because there's a lot of cool things you can find in here, and I'm actually going to go to drag loss. As you notice, we have an extreme amount of drag loss, mostly because these rockets can't be throttled, so they're going max force in the thicker atmosphere, which typically you want to avoid. But what we could do is maybe make the nose a little more pointy and make the wings a little more swept back, make it a little more aerodynamic, and we could actually fix that a little bit. So always kind of look around to what these charts do because it will really help you make a better rocket. Your first rocket does not have to be perfect, and I'll be honest with you, we only actually launched this one time because when we come back in the next episode, we'll be talking about downrange and controlled avionics. And then I'm going to move right into upgrading and updating your rocket with new tech. So at this point, I am happy with this rocket. I'm going to go ahead and tool it, and we're going to call this little episode an end. So thank you guys again for stopping by. If you like the content, feel free to give it a like. And as always, if you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Keep in mind, you can always leave comments below and tell me other shorts or ideas you'd like to see me do in the future. And I'll add them to a list and see what I can do. If you would like to meet more like-minded people like myself that can possibly help you out, I'd recommend joining the Carnassus Discord server. I moderate there, and I'm there pretty often. Feel free to ping me and ask me a question. If I can't answer, I'm sure someone else can. But with that, I'm going to let you guys go, and I hope I see you guys next time in Chapter 2 of How to RP1.